Hey there, history hunters! Welcome back to Mankind Unveiled, where we explore the wild, twisted, and jaw-dropping stories that shaped humanity. Now, today's tale? It's one for the ages. Imagine someone so deadly, so ruthlessly effective, that he didn't just conquer empires. He may have literally changed the Earth's climate. We're talking about a man responsible for an estimated 40 million deaths. That's more than Hitler, more than Stalin. And he did it centuries before them, with no modern technology, no guns, no bombs, just sheer strategy, brutality, and psychological warfare. His name? You already know it. Genghis Khan. Let's dive in. Born around the year 1162, under the endless sky of the Mongolian steppe, a boy named Temujin took his first breath into a world of cold winds, shifting loyalties, and constant danger. This wasn't the kind of place where children grew up dreaming of castles or riches. This was a land of survival, where winter could skin the earth bare and where death came just as often from rival clans as from hunger or frostbite. The Mongolian steppe is a vast sea of grass, stretching farther than the eye can see. There are no walls, no cities, just nomadic tribes, moving with the seasons, following their herds. Life here was raw, real, brutal, and for Temujin, it got even worse. His father, Yesugei, was a respected chieftain of the Borjigin clan, but power meant enemies. And one day, while visiting a neighboring tribe, Yesugei was poisoned, most likely with fermented mare's milk laced with toxins. Temujin was only about 9 years old. And then came the real betrayal. After his father's death, Temujin's family, his mother, brothers, and baby sisters, were abandoned by their own people, cast out. No protection, no supplies, nothing but the cold and whatever they could scavenge from the land. For years, they lived in near starvation, sometimes surviving on wild roots, rodents, and even the bones of animals they found frozen in the dirt. Temujin was born into power and then stripped of everything. But here's where most stories would end: starving, forgotten in the grasslands. Instead, this is where Temujin began. Even as a teenager, he had this intensity, this presence. People followed him not because of bloodlines, but because he made them believe he could take them somewhere better. He escaped capture. He survived slavery. And bit by bit, he clawed his way back, forming alliances, breaking others, marrying strategically. He was ruthless, yes, but never reckless. He didn't just unite tribes, he rewired their loyalty. Mongol tribes had been fighting each other for generations: cattle raids, blood feuds, revenge killings. Temujin flipped the script. He abolished aristocratic privilege and promoted warriors based on merit, not noble birth. He took former enemies and made them generals. He broke tribal identity and gave them a new one: Mongol. And with this unified force, he built something the world wasn't ready for: a war machine on horseback. Swift, disciplined, terrifyingly efficient. These were warriors who could ride 100 miles in a day, sleep in the saddle, and shoot arrows with deadly accuracy, even while galloping at full speed. In the year 1206, with the steppes finally under his control, Temujin was given a new name by his followers: Genghis Khan, universal ruler. And he didn't take that title lightly. It wasn't just symbolic, it was a declaration of intent. Because for Genghis, the steppe wasn't enough. His eyes were on the world. Let's rewind the clock to the early 1200s. The Khwarezmian Empire, sprawled across modern-day Iran, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, and parts of Afghanistan, was thriving. Think glittering mosques, massive libraries, thriving bazaars filled with silks, spices, and scholars quoting Persian poetry. Its cities were some of the crown jewels of the Islamic world. Places like Bukhara and Samarkand weren't just rich. They were cultural hubs, crossroads of trade, learning, and influence. And the man sitting on the throne? Shah Ala ad-Din Muhammad II. Proud, powerful, and just a little too confident. Now picture this. One day, a massive Mongol trade caravan arrives at the gates of Otrar, a city on the empire's eastern edge. It wasn't some scrappy little convoy. It was 500 men strong, loaded with fine goods, expensive textiles, rare treasures from China, all sent by Genghis Khan himself. The message was clear. We want peace. We want trade. Let's do business. But the governor of Otrar, a man named Inalchuk, had other ideas. Maybe he was suspicious. Maybe he was greedy. Or maybe, and this is important, he just didn't understand who he was dealing with. Inalchuk accused the entire caravan of being spies in disguise. And then, in a move that would echo across history, he had them arrested and executed. Not quietly either. They were tortured, humiliated, and their goods were seized like war plunder. Genghis Khan, remarkably, didn't go berserk. Not yet. Instead, he chose diplomacy. He sent a team of 3 ambassadors, 1 Muslim, 2 Mongols, to the Shah himself, offering forgiveness if the governor was handed over. The Shah's response? He killed the ambassadors. Not just killed. He shaved the heads of the Mongol envoys, mutilated them, and sent one back alive as an insult. In the Mongol world, this wasn't just rude. It was sacrilege. Ambassadors were sacred. Harming one was like declaring war on the heavens. And with that, Genghis Khan's patience snapped. This wasn't going to be a war over territory. It was going to be a warning, carved into the earth in fire and blood. The invasion came in 1220, and it hit Khwarezmia like a thunderclap. Genghis didn't just send an army, he sent multiple coordinated forces, attacking from different directions, moving faster than anything the Shah had ever seen. The Mongols split into columns, traveling light, striking hard, and confusing the enemy. Their horsemen were masters of the feigned retreat, luring armies into traps, then circling back like wolves. City after city fell, but it wasn't just conquest, it was punishment. In Bukhara, Genghis personally entered the city's grand mosque. He stood before the terrified citizens and said something chilling. "I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have sent a punishment like me upon you." Let that sink in. Samarkand, the jewel of the empire, fell next. Its defenders overwhelmed by Mongol cunning and sheer force. Some of the city's elites surrendered. Others tried to resist. It didn't matter. Genghis slaughtered them all the same. Survivors were often rounded up and used as human shields in the next siege. But perhaps the darkest chapter came in Nishapur. This city had resisted fiercely, and in the aftermath, Genghis's son-in-law was killed by a stray arrow. When Genghis heard the news, he gave a single horrific command: kill everyone. And they did. Historical estimates vary wildly. Some say 100,000 dead. Others say 1.7 million across the entire Khwarezm campaign. But the point is this: the cities of Khwarezm didn't just fall. They were erased, libraries burned, wells poisoned. The streets ran red for days. Entire urban centers, some of which had stood for centuries, became ash-covered wastelands. And the Shah? He didn't die in glory. He didn't even fight. He fled, first to the Caspian Sea, then to a remote island, where he reportedly died of dysentery, broken and alone, as Mongol scouts hunted him across the land. All of this, every horrifying step, was sparked by a botched trade deal. It wasn't just about gold, it was about respect. And when that respect was violated, Genghis Khan showed the world that peace wasn't the only thing he could offer. He could also bring hell. Here's where the story turns from brutal to terrifyingly calculated. Genghis Khan didn't just win battles with horses and swords. He weaponized fear itself, not just as a byproduct of war, but as a central pillar of his entire strategy. Fear was his silent army. It marched ahead of his real one, seeping into cities long before a single hoof hit the dirt. Now, picture this. You're living in a walled city in Central Asia. Maybe you're a merchant, a farmer, a baker. Life is fairly normal. Then you hear distant rumors, not from soldiers, but from terrified refugees who fled other cities. They speak of an unstoppable force coming from the east. They say entire cities, ancient ones with thick walls and strong armies, were burned to the ground, that the rivers ran red, that no one was spared, not the old, not the infants, not even the animals. They say that Genghis Khan's men left behind pyramids of severed skulls outside the gates of conquered cities, grotesque warnings made of the dead. Now imagine it's your city's turn. That kind of fear doesn't just shake morale, it destroys it. Some cities dropped their weapons before the first arrow was even fired. Surrender without resistance, and Genghis Khan might just spare your life, maybe even let your city continue under Mongol rule with some autonomy. But resist, and the consequences were apocalyptic. And this wasn't madness. This was by design. Genghis understood something few generals did. Terror is efficient. Why fight dozens of battles, losing men and resources, when you can conquer by reputation alone? He let his brutality spread like wildfire, using survivors as storytellers, witnesses who'd recount the horror and do the psychological groundwork for the next invasion. It's like military marketing, just medieval and monstrous. Here's one example. After the massacre at Nishapur, survivors were allowed to flee. Not because the Mongols were merciful, far from it, but because they would carry the story of what they saw. And those stories worked better than siege engines. Fun fact, the Mongols even used visual theatrics in battle. Before sieging a city, they'd sometimes light hundreds of campfires to make their numbers appear far greater than they were. They'd also march prisoners and animals in circles to kick up dust, giving the illusion of a vast army just beyond the horizon. And once the siege began, psychological tactics continued. They'd catapult the severed heads of captured enemies over city walls. Or they'd fling diseased corpses to spread fear and infection. Early examples of biological warfare. Resistance didn't just mean death. It meant erasure. Entire cities like Merv, once among the most populous cities on Earth, were wiped so thoroughly from the map that some historians say it lost 300,000 to 700,000 people in a single event. And when Genghis was finished with a place, he often ordered every trace of civilization destroyed. Irrigation systems broken, libraries torched, granaries emptied. It was shock and awe, centuries before the term existed. But here's the genius and the horror of it all. This reputation for annihilation became one of his most powerful tools. Instead of wasting time and troops, Genghis let fear do the conquering for him. By the time the real army arrived, the battle was already half won. in the minds of those waiting behind the walls. That's how psychological warfare worked under Genghis Khan. It wasn't random savagery. It was deliberate, systematic, and terrifyingly effective. It was diplomacy, with an axe. And it worked. His empire didn't just grow, it exploded across the map. In less than 25 years, Genghis Khan went from a tribal outcast to ruling the largest contiguous empire the world had ever seen. And the fear? It kept echoing long after the hooves had passed. Now this is where the story truly blows people's minds. We often talk about rulers shaping the world through laws, culture, conquest. But Genghis Khan? He may have reshaped the very climate of Earth itself. Let's start with the numbers. Historians and demographers estimate that Genghis Khan's campaigns were responsible for the deaths of around 40 million people. That's about 1 in every 10 humans alive at the time. 40 million. Put that into perspective. That's more than Stalin, more than Hitler, more than any 20th century warlord with tanks, missiles, or nukes. And Genghis did it in the 13th century, with horses, bows, and strategy. Entire civilizations vanished. Cities that had stood for centuries, centers of culture, science, trade, were turned to rubble. The rivers that fed them clogged with bodies. And here's the thing, when people die on that scale, something strange happens to the land. The Mongol conquests emptied towns, villages, and entire provinces. Farmland was abandoned, not for years, but for generations. Think about it. Farmers dead, irrigation systems destroyed, no one left to plant or harvest. In places like Central Asia, Persia, and northern China, millions of hectares of cultivated land went silent. And nature? Nature moved in. Trees began to grow where crops once stood. Forests returned to regions that hadn't seen wild growth in centuries. Grasslands thickened. Wetlands expanded. This rewilding wasn't planned. It was the accidental byproduct of apocalyptic depopulation. But the impact? Massive. Here's where it gets even more jaw-dropping. Modern climate scientists, particularly from studies in the early 2000s, have suggested that this massive regrowth of vegetation sucked CO2 out of the atmosphere, enough to cause a noticeable drop in global carbon levels. Let that sink in. Genghis Khan, by killing so many people and shutting down so much human activity, may have reversed climate change. 800 years before, we knew what that even meant. In fact, some researchers believe this played a part in triggering the Little Ice Age, a period of global cooling that lasted from the 14th to the 19th century. Rivers like the Thames in London froze solid. Harvests across Europe failed more frequently. Winters grew longer, summers shorter. The world got colder, and Genghis may have helped pull the planetary thermostat down. Now, to be clear, he didn't do this intentionally. This wasn't some eco-friendly warlord planting trees for a better tomorrow. No, this was the byproduct of death on an industrial scale, centuries before industry even existed. But it's a haunting legacy, because while most empires leave behind architecture, books, monuments, Genghis left behind a footprint on the biosphere, a climate event tied not to volcanic eruptions or solar cycles, but to conquest. Fun fact: according to a 2011 study published in the journal Climatic Change, the Mongol invasions were one of only 4 major historical events in which human activity led to significant carbon decline, the others being the Black Death, the fall of the Ming Dynasty, and the colonization of the Americas. So yes, Genghis Khan didn't just redraw maps or collapse kingdoms. He may have hit the pause button on global warming, with arrows and fire. And that's a level of impact most rulers could never even imagine. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, he didn't go out in a blaze of glory. There was no dramatic final battle, no last stand. In fact, his death is still shrouded in mystery. Some say he fell off his horse during a campaign. Others claim he was wounded in battle or assassinated by a captured princess who hid a dagger where no one thought to check. We may never know for sure, but what we do know is this. By the time he died, Genghis Khan had forged the largest contiguous land empire the world has ever seen. From the Yellow Sea in China, across the brutal deserts of Central Asia, through the snowy peaks of the Caucasus, all the way to the Danube River in Eastern Europe. His banner, the simple black standard of the Mongols, cast a long, terrifying shadow. But Genghis didn't just leave behind a political legacy carved in blood and conquest. He left behind something far more personal, a biological legacy, one that millions of people still carry in their veins today. In 2003, a team of geneticists led by Dr. Chris Tyler Smith made a discovery that sent shockwaves through the scientific world. While studying Y chromosome data across Asia, they found that 1 in every 200 men alive today, that's about 16 million men worldwide, share a nearly identical Y chromosome. And this particular genetic marker, it traces back to a single man who lived in Mongolia around 1,000 years ago. Guess who? That's right, Genghis Khan. This means that approximately 0.5% of the entire male population on Earth carries a direct paternal line from the great Khan himself. And remember, that's just the men. If you include daughters and female descendants, the number of people with Genghis Khan's DNA today could be far higher. So how did this happen? Well, Genghis Khan wasn't exactly known for monogamy. He had multiple wives, both official queens and war brides taken during his campaigns. But even more important was the privilege given to his descendants. His sons and grandsons inherited not just lands, but women, often dozens or hundreds, depending on their rank. The Mongols actively spread their bloodline as part of empire building. His grandson, Kublai Khan, who founded the Yuan dynasty in China, had a court filled with concubines. Another descendant, Tamerlane, followed the same pattern of dynasty and DNA. The elite ruling class passed down the Khan's Y chromosome generation after generation, often into multiple regions simultaneously, from the Middle East to the Indian subcontinent. In fact, one of the highest concentrations of Genghis Khan's genetic legacy isn't even in Mongolia today. It's in northern Pakistan, in an ethnic group called the Hazara, who proudly trace their lineage back to the Mongols. Fun fact, in Mongolian culture, having Genghis Khan in your family tree isn't just trivia. It's a badge of honor. Schools, airports, vodka brands, even karaoke bars bear his name. He's not seen as a tyrant there. He's seen as a national hero, a symbol of pride and strength. But here's what's truly wild to think about. Long after the cities he conquered have been rebuilt, long after the dust of his armies settled and his empire fractured, he lives on. Not in statues, not in stories, in us, in millions of living people who walk the earth today with a strand of the Khan's DNA quietly pulsing through their cells. That's a legacy no map can fully capture. So here's the question that lingers like smoke after a battlefield. Was Genghis Khan a visionary leader or a genocidal maniac? The truth, maybe he was both. And that's the uncomfortable beauty of history. It refuses to fit neatly into black and white. Genghis Khan's story is not a fairy tale of good or evil. It's a mirror, held up to the raw, unfiltered nature of power. Yes, He built an empire that stretched across 11 time zones. Under his rule, the Silk Road, that vast ancient trade network connecting China to the Mediterranean, flourished like never before. Caravans carrying silk, spices, medicine, music, and mathematics moved swiftly and safely through Mongol lands. He created a passport system for merchants, a stamped tablet called a paisa, guaranteeing protection and free passage. In a world torn apart by petty kingdoms and rogue warlords, that was revolutionary. And while Europe burned heretics at the stake, Genghis Khan's empire practiced religious tolerance. Buddhists, Muslims, Christians, and shamans all lived under Mongol rule, free to worship without persecution. As long as they paid their taxes, of course. He abolished aristocratic privilege, promoted people based on merit, and built a military system so efficient it inspired warfare doctrines centuries later. He even set up Pony Express-style communication relays across thousands of miles, the closest thing to high-speed messaging in the medieval world. But let's not polish the skull too much. This same man slaughtered entire populations. He ordered the systematic extermination of cities that resisted him. Not just the soldiers, but the children, the elderly, the artists, the scholars. People who posed no threat. They were cut down anyway. He created oceans of blood and mountains of bones. The air behind his army often reeked of burning flesh. His generals recorded massacres like they were inventory lists. His name alone was enough to clear towns before his scouts even arrived. Genghis Khan didn't just change borders, he changed demographics, ecologies, and perhaps even the atmosphere itself. His legacy exists in museum displays and in the DNA of millions of living people, but also in ghost towns buried in sand, in the lost languages, and in the silenced songs of civilizations that no longer exist. He wasn't the devil. He wasn't a saint. He was a force, as unstoppable as a plague, as strategic as a chess grandmaster, and as brutal as a storm breaking across a fragile world. And that, maybe more than anything, is what his life teaches us. That history isn't always shaped by grand ideals or noble causes. Sometimes it's shaped by fear, ambition, and the raw, terrifying will of one man who refused to be forgotten. And sometimes that will is so vast, so relentless, and so violent, it leaves a mark on the entire planet. And that's where we leave this staggering chapter of history. One drenched in dust, blood, ambition, and the haunting echo of hooves that once shook the earth from China to the gates of Europe. Thanks for watching Mankind Unveiled. If you found this story as chilling and oddly fascinating as we did, give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe. We've got plenty more tales where this one came from. Stories that hide beneath the surface of what we think we know about human history. From forgotten emperors to cursed artifacts, from bizarre crimes to civilizations lost to time. We're peeling back the layers of humanity, one unbelievable story at a time. Have a strange slice of history you want us to cover? A mystery that's been itching at the back of your brain? Drop it in the comments below. We're always listening, and some of our best episodes come from your suggestions. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and above all, stay human.